Good evening, campers, it's me, Kieran. Today we are going to talk about Pearl by Sian Hughes. In order for this to work, there has to be some truth, and I need to come clean, okay? My least substrata of author is poet turned novelist. And Sian Hughes, similar to Motion Morgan, does the exact same thing, where they just overwrite and get so over-descriptive that it moves into such pretentious that I enter somewhat into a permanent state of eye-rolling or just laughing at like the absolute absurdity of some of the language used. Poetry, you can kind of get away with it. It's a condensed form. You have to be very specific with your wording in order to get your message across. There's a little bit of looseness with a novel, and in 220 pages, Pearl by Sian Hughes absolutely frustrated me. My frustration of this novel began after the 20-page mark and then continually crescendoed in vigorous hatred, and then died a very quick death up until the last chapter. This book really is bookend by the two strongest pieces, and then the middle is this amorphous, wibbly, wobbly, pretentious meditation reminiscing on grief, motherhood. Pearl is named after the medieval poem that has been authored by Gawain and is featured within the collection of Gawain and the Green Knight. Our protagonist's mum has a collection of Gawain's work, and Gawain and the Green Knight has marginalia aplenty, but upon the next poem, Pearl, there's scant notes, and this is what sets up the book. But I don't think there's a requirement or a requisite to read Pearl in order to get the most out of this. The poem Pearl is hardly mentioned in the novel. It's more thematic about the exploration of grief, which our protagonist goes down, but is mostly just reminiscing about what has previously happened to her. So with the recollection, but also the recounting of her own personal story to understand her mother, we begin to realise what her family have told her, what they haven't told her, and the bits of information that she herself is inserted or twisted to fit her own narrative. Many times throughout the narrative does this protagonist tell us that it might not have gone like that, and she might have made it up, or I've changed these little bits in order to suit my story, and it's really grating. Now, this is a story about motherhood, so I'm ready for someone to say, well, you didn't like this because you're not a mother, you wouldn't know this, you don't have the lived experience, but I'll hold your dingus and grab onto your chaps, because I just got a reverse Uno card, pal. Bam! My sister died before I was born, so I know what it's like to almost go through this grieving process of someone that you don't really know and don't really understand the circumstances around them. I know that. Shove that up your pipe and smoke it, or vape it, I don't particularly care. This book is categorically Midlandish in the fact that it's set in the Midlands. The author is from the Midlands, and you know what the people in the Midlands do? They wang on at you for so long. Chin wag, chin wag, chin wag. If this was an actual conversation, I would have done 23 and at least 67s. Wow, that's really crazy. Hoping that the story would end. Nothing really happens. Nothing is really revelatory. It's an insular meditative wanging on with the most prophetic thing that is to be said on nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes sound like a bit of a jolly, but they have a really dark message sometimes. Starting every damn chapter, I would say they're chosen at a whim. You get that little rhythm of a bop on, and then she's like, oh, do you want me to tell you about this? You're like, no, my God, please stop. The connection the protagonist makes to her dead mum and how she treats her own daughter. It's like a copy-paste job. But again, it's kind of justified by, that's what I would think about my mum. But you know what, maybe I've made that up. Maybe someone did tell me that, but I'm going to change this bit because that suits how I want it to be. And that's kind of what progresses this book. But there's no real plot. There's no real it's a nothing burger. This book is a nothing burger. I really despised the majority of this, bar like the first 20 pages and the last. But even the last is a ghost. Oh, get out of here. You did my Sweden with a pseudo haunted house, and not even the bit about the puppies could have won me over. I know Sian Hughes writes poetry, but if you're going to put it into a novel, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the past folds on itself like a puff pastry, and the protagonist finds herself stuck within the layers, like, you're gonna have a hard time trying to win me over. Blodwen, I promise you, reading this book was like listening to someone who's really long in the tooth. And sometimes you walk away from people scratching your head going, those minutes of my life, wasted, gone, for eternity. But Blodwen, you know what was worse? Is right at the end, where the... I can't believe she did this! Where the protagonist goes, you know, maybe I was reading the wrong poem all along. Maybe I shouldn't have been reading Pearl. Maybe I should have been reading the one that my mum annotated. Oh my lord. She really did knock my knees and call me Cassandra on that one. I mean, if you could have heard the sigh that had come out of me. Ah. Blodwen, it's books like this that make me treasure that you can't read. Pearl by Sian Hughes gets a 2 out of 10. Get in the Testaments Club. Oh, I'm having a drink.